Hello and welcome to the DX Fleet interface and configuration video. I'll be walking you through the entire interface and how to use it, as well as how to configure the software for your organization and sites.
Once we log into the application, we're going to be provided with this All Sites dashboard. The All Sites dashboard is going to show us all of your transactional history, as well as any active alerts within the application. It's an easy go-to place to see all of your up-to-date information for sales amongst all of your sites. We have a site selection up here. So if we were going to jump down to our site, now we're viewing a site-specific dashboard. So now we're having the status of all of our pumps and our terminals at this particular site, as well as the following data that we went over on the All Sites dashboard, but now in a site-specific format. So you can see here we have our pump status. We currently have 2 pumps and they're idle, and we have a fit status, which is also idle. As somebody fuels the transactions, these icons will change. If any of the pumps go down, or if the terminal goes down, you will be the icon will change, and you will be also sent a notification alert with the status of that change. We head over to the notifications tab. We have a contacts page. The contacts page will allow you to add individuals that would like to be contacted for alerts, as well as any sort of email notifications for reporting or exporting. So we would simply come into the application, we would add a new contact. You would fill in the contact details for that particular person. If they'd like to receive text message alerts, you can simply accept the text message option here, and you could provide a phone number for that particular contact. These contacts, once again, are going to be anybody that would like to receive email notifications, text message notifications, or scheduled reporting or exporting. Once the contacts are created, we can join a contacts group. This will allow you to add multiple contacts for the application by simply selecting the contacts and adding them to the list in that contacts group. Once they're added to the list, you can simply define that group's name, and then also you have an option to always send text messages to this group. We simply need to save this to create that contact group. Once the contact group is created, we have an active alert history notification that we can schedule. So here we are going to define which contact group we're going to have turned on for these notifications. You can turn on and off alerts by simply clicking on the slider over here. Then you have another option here. Does this group want to be notified via email or text message, or both? In this case, we have them both turned on. We also have a timer or a delay that you can set on the active alerts. Right now, this alert is currently set for an immediate notification. So as the fit down status in this point, if the fit goes down, you would get an immediate alert via email or text message. If you change this, you could simply set a delay timer. This will, in essence, start as the event happens, and after that time period is over, it will check the status, and if the status is still down, at that point you would send the alert. This would allow you to disregard any sort of little minor issues or issues that get self-resolved, or if, for example, you lose internet connectivity for a minute, it's going to basically allow you to bypass those notifications. If you'd like to be alerted immediately, you can simply just select immediate. Then you just go ahead and save all of these alert statuses once you have them configured. Under notifications as well, you have the alert history. So the alert history is going to show you any of the past alerts on your sites. So if the edge box went offline, if you had a pump that went into Pump Sentry, got disabled, then you would see those active alerts, and you can act upon those alerts. Jumping over to the cards menu, we have our card defaults. So card defaults are going to allow you to speed up and optimize your card creation process, basically by setting up a default card template for each one of your card types. So if you wanted all of your cards to have a particular prompt, or if you wanted them all to be prompting for miscellaneous entry or something, then you can go in here and define a card default template. And every time you create this card type, this one being a vehicle, it will use this template every time it creates a new vehicle card. You could do that for your vehicles, as well as your drivers and your accounts. In the Accounts tab, you have the ability to manage existing accounts, create new accounts, or make changes to any of your account status here. So what we would do is we'd simply come in here and add a new account. You're going to have all your account details, so you'll go ahead and fill out your account number and the name that you'd like to be reflected on that account. Once the accounts are created, then you can start creating new cards, and each card you can define in being in a particular account. So we've already got some accounts configured, so we'll go ahead and jump over to the driver vehicle records. If you want to create a new account here, you simply come down here to the bottom once it's all filled out, and you can just hit save, and that'll create your account. Once the account is created for the first time, there will be no cards into it. But as soon as you go to the driver and vehicle records here, you have the ability to add a new card and then select an available account. So we're going to go ahead and click add. Here it's going to look similar to the account creation process. We have the ability to add a card number, driver name, short name, and any restrictions that are available on that card. So if we were going to go ahead and fill out this card here, say we're going to make a card 7890, and then we're going to give it a name, John Smith. And one thing that the DX Fleet has that you may or may not be familiar with is the ability to read a different number of card formats. Some of those might be a keyboard entry, magstrip card, chip key, or RFID tag. Here we're going to put in the number that is going to be read at the terminal. So that's going to be whether you're using physical media or keyboard entry. And then here we have the ability to use an alphanumeric string. That's going to be the number that is reflected on a report or an export. So if you'd like a number other than the actual physical media that's being read at the terminal, then here you can actually go in and create this with alphanumerics. So you can use letters and numbers or any combination of the two. Here we're going to go ahead and use the physical media. So for now, we're just going to say this is like a keyboard entry. Somebody's going to enter 7890 on a touchpad outside. You have the ability to set the card status as valid, invalid, or a particular reason why it's invalid. So we're going to just say this card is valid. We're going to give it a pen number of 1234. Here we can define any of the other fields that are required. So in this case, short name, and if there's any restrictions for the quantity or the product type, you could select any restriction. We're also going to want to select the fuel zone. Fuel zones will allow you to send the card to only specific sites. So you can define that fuel zone to be one site only or multiple sites. This is going to allow you to dictate which cards are going to go to which site. In this case, we only have the one site. We're going to go ahead and send it to all sites. We're going to hit save. Oh, and we forgot to select the account. So here we have the ability to select which account this card is going to go into. So we're going to go ahead and select Tech Department. We're going to hit save. Okay, now the card has been created. You're going to see that it was added here. And once the card gets created, it's automatically going to be pushed down to your fuel site controller. So as soon as this happens, there's a simultaneous sync process that happens all the time. So it's going to see that this card was generated. It's going to go ahead and push that card automatically to your fuel site controller so that it can begin authorizing transactions. The same thing happens when you process a transaction on site. It's going to see that there's a new transaction. It's going to pull that data into the cloud automatically. You no longer have to have any sort of scheduled pull or scheduled card updates. The cloud is going to simply see that transaction and add it to the transactions table. It's going to see this card update, and it's going to push that card update down to the fuel site controller. This gives you flexibility of having all of your transactions up to date, all of your cards up to date all the time. In the cards menu here, you also have the ability to filter by the cards. So if you were looking only for a particular card in a particular department, you can come in here and you could filter those to see the card selection. We also have a search box, so if you wanted to search for a particular card, you can also do the search functionality here at the top. Next to the card, we have options to edit existing cards, to delete a card, or to invalidate a card. If it's already invalid, this option will also revalidate an existing card if you wanted to change it from invalid to valid. Jumping onto the card import option, this will allow you to use a Excel template to download the template. It will allow you to populate that template with all of your card data, and it will allow you to upload those cards into the cloud for the first time. If you had a large number of cards or you're coming from a different platform and you want to simply insert your cards into the card table on the database, then you could fill out this template and you can go ahead and insert the cards automatically through the template. This will save you time so you don't have to individually create all of your cards. We also have a database migration option where tech support can go ahead and back up your existing database and insert it into the cloud for you. Jumping over to the transactions table, here we have the existing transactions that are on the site. You can do several filter options to filter the transactions that are being displayed on screen here. If you needed to make a change to a particular transaction, you can go in and edit the transactional data for those transactions. You can also do a search as well if you're searching for a particular driver, particular transaction number, things like that. Once the transactions are in the cloud, we have ability to export those transactions out of the cloud into different file format types that we support. So if we were going to do an export, we can export as Excel or something similar like a ASCII CSV file, which would then open in Excel. So if we were going to do this, basically what we'd be doing is we would select our site. We'd select which accounts we want to go ahead and export. You can define what you would like to show up on the export. So in this case, we're going to say we're going to include all of our network transactions, manual transactions, things that have been exported. Here we could say export status. So do we want things that have never been exported? Do we want things that have been exported, or do we want everything? So in this case, we're going to go ahead and say we're going to export everything that's never been exported. Here we have the option of exporting the file format, and then here we can say what date range format we'd like it to be displayed on that export. We also have a time format, and then you could define the date ranges that you want to show up in that export. So for example, if we only wanted to export the data for this year, we can just export from here, and then you just select the export option here. Once you do the export, it's going to simply download to your PC in that file format that you've selected. We also have the ability to use a custom export. The custom export tab will allow you to define the fields that are going to show up on that export data. If we're going to use this custom export, we simply just need to check this custom. And when we do this, it's going to use this template for the custom. To define that template, we just need to come up here and select custom export. We're going to add a new custom export. We're going to go ahead, give it a name. We're going to select the file format again once that we want to use for that export. And then we're going to go ahead and define what fields we want to show up in the export data. For example, if you only wanted the driver's name, you could simply add the driver name. If you want that driver's transaction totals, and say this is all the data that you wanted to show up on that export, you could simply save this template. In the previous page, you would go ahead and select the export, use custom. Then you'd be provided with an Excel CSV file that will only show the driver name and the transaction totals, or whatever fields that you defined here on that export. Jumping over to reports. Reports, once the transactions are in the cloud, we have the ability to generate a report on the existing data that's in there. So we can come in here and select one of the predefined reports that we have available in the cloud, and then you can define what dates you want to show up, or what transaction dates you want to show up in that report. So we're going to go ahead and select the start date and an end date. Let's go back. And then you can define what cards you want to show up in that export, or in that report. So let's just say we want all the cards, and then we could simply hit generate. And we're going to be provided with a PDF file here. So you can simply open the PDF, and now we have our report. At this point, you could email that, or you could print it out, whatever you would need. We also have the ability to schedule a report or an export. Jumping over to the scheduler, here we have the ability to schedule an export or schedule a report. So we're going to simply define a name for this scheduled task. So we're going to say like daily report. And then here we can select the type of event, which we're going to do a report. We have the same reports available. So we'll go ahead and select the report that we'd like to generate. Now here we simply have a selection box of who we want to be emailed that report. So if we go ahead and just select a few individuals that we would like to get this report emailed to them, we'll just go ahead and check their boxes here on the right. Then we're going to have an option to define the same features that we have in the report generation process. So what date ranges do we want to show up on that report? So for example, if we want, say, the last 30 days to show up on the report. Here we're going to be able to select the card. If we're going to do all cards, we can simply select all. If you'd like to do a range of cards, you would select the starting card and then the ending card. Going down to the frequency, if you'd like to schedule it for a time in the future to automatically run once, you can simply select the date that you would like that to be performed. If you'd like to be recurring, we would just simply select recurring here, and then we could say how often we would like it to run. So if we're going to do a daily report, we're going to go ahead and select every 1 day. And then we could select the date that we'd like to show up in that report as well. So we have to pick a day in the future. So let's go ahead and pick the day in the future, and we'll go ahead and hit save. So now every day at that particular time, it's going to automatically email that report out. If we'd like to go ahead and create another scheduled event, we can come in here. Let's say we're going to do a weekly export. Now we can select the export data. And then here we're going to define the same thing that was in the previous export. So we're going to select our site. We're going to select our accounts. We're going to select everything that we'd like to show up on that export. And then we're going to come in here. We're going to define what we want to export. So we're going to do everything that's never exported. We're going to do a CSV file format. And we're going to select the date and the time. Okay, we're going to do a relative date. We're going to do the last 30 days. Where once again, we're going to select who we would like to receive this emailed scheduled export. We're going to come down here. We're going to do the same. We're going to do recurring. This time we're going to do every 1 week. And now here we can define when do we want it to run. Do we want it to run, on Sunday, on Monday, on Wednesday? So let's just say we want it Monday, and we want to do it starting next Monday. And here we can define what time. So let's say at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, we're going to get our first schedule report. We're going to go ahead and hit save. And now, so we have a scheduled daily report. We have a weekly export. And what's going to happen is when you get emailed these reports, you're going to basically have a link to download your report. So delivered right to your inbox, you're going to see a link. You're going to go ahead and click it. It's going to then save that file just like it did here below on your browser in your local PC. It's going to save that export or it's going to save that report. And those are going to allow you to automate the system, have the transactions delivered to you, so you don't have to spend a lot of time coming into the application to generate reports or exports. You could simply automate that process. We also have the ability to upgrade your fuel site controller remotely. We also have the ability to back up the configuration and make changes to your fuel site controller through the application. That's going to be handled through the settings tab and the sync button here. So when you select sync, now we're going to have our activity. We're going to be able to read our fuel site controller settings. We're going to be able to read the site settings and the global settings. And then when we make changes in the application, we could then come back and send those changes back down to the fuel site controller. In essence, writing over the top of your fuel site controller's configuration. So you want to be very careful here when making any changes to the application if you're not familiar with how this functionality works. You'll also want to ensure that before you make any send changes, you do also read the site settings and the global settings. This is just going to ensure that there is a backup of your fuel site controller's configuration in the application so that you don't have to worry about erasing something on your site. If we're going to upgrade your fuel site controller, you'll first want to read the site settings and global settings, but you'll go ahead and click the upgrade button. You're going to select the available versions that are online, and you could simply click upgrade. That's going to push the firmware update to that fuel site controller remotely. We also have the ability to reset the system, set open and close system times, to do a system start, or to change the passwords as well for your fuel site controller on this page. Under Job Status, the Job Status tab is going to give you the ability to view those active changes that you've made and pushed down to the fuel site controller. So for example, if you're doing a FSC upgrade and it's pushing the firmware update to the fuel site controller, here's where you would go to see when that was done. You should see a success message when those big tasks get completed. Jumping into the Sites tab, here we have the ability to change your site-specific settings, as well as configure things at a site level in the application. You'll also see the status of your site and whether it's currently running or not running, and you have the ability to do other functionality on the site. So for example, if you want to edit the changes on your site, you could just simply hit the edit button. We have a Resend Card option here. So when your site gets created for the first time, if your fuel site controller is new and doesn't currently have cards, then we would go ahead and resend those cards, and we would use this resend functionality right here. We also have a start and stop option. The start and stop option is going to basically pause the site syncing that happens all the time to allow you to terminal into the fuel site controller to make changes manually on the controller if needed. To start and stop, you simply just select this, and then it'll give you a warning. Do you want to go ahead and start again? You just say okay. This is going to allow you to, once again, terminal in without, basically you're interrupting the sync process at that point to make fuel site controller level changes. Go ahead and hit edit site to make changes to the site details. So we're going to go ahead, in this case, we're going to hit the controller option. Here we have our communication method for the fuel site controller, as well as our passwords to log into that fuel site controller. If those passwords change, this is where you would go ahead and edit those controller configurations. Jumping over to the tanks and the pumps are not necessarily required, but you will want to go ahead and add them so that the software, you can use the software to its greatest ability. If you do not configure the tanks and the pumps in here, then certain features like the pricing tool will not show up correctly. So you'll want to go ahead and select your tanks and then add the tanks in here. It's real simple to add. You would just select your tank, you would give it a product type that it's being dispensed, and then you would hit save. Once you save those tank configurations, you will see them in the added tanks option here. The pumps, same thing. You can come in here and define your pumps, and you can see your added pumps from the added pump controller options here. Same thing here. So this is going to show us our pumps and our tanks all in these options. This is just going to allow you to use other features within the application. If you needed to change anything like the receipt or the prompts, display messages, all of these options are available to you. Once again, you'll just want to make sure that you read the site-specific settings from that sync tab before you push any of these changes back down to your fuel site controller. Other than the Sites tab, we have an Organization. So the Organizations tab is going to allow you to make global changes to all of your sites. So these are going to be things like your product types, your product restrictions, things that are defined on a global scale. So here we're going to have our ability to use gallons, liters, quarts, your fuel types. So this is going to be the list of products that you're currently dispensing. So you'll want to make sure that this matches what your fuel site controller is configured as. This is going to allow the application to understand the transactions that are being synced and what fuel types you're dispensing on site. Jumping over to restrictions. Here's the same thing. We're going to be defining our list of product restrictions and quantity restrictions. We're going to want to make sure that those restrictions are configured on the fuel site controller in the same manner so that the application understands what restriction codes we're sending over when we create a new card with restrictions. One important feature of the cloud application that you're going to want to configure is to define the card record. This should be done during the onboarding process, but just so you get an understanding of what it does and how it might affect your application, we'll go over it here briefly. We're defining what kind of cards we're accepting in the system, whether we're going to be using single card system entry or whether we're going to be using a dual card entry. So single card would be if you're only using one card to authorize a transaction. Dual card or dual entry system would be for using driver and vehicle combination cards. So we have two cards. One might be physical and one might be a keyboard entry, or they might be both keyboard entry or both physical. But here we're basically just defining, are we doing a dual card entry system or not? And if we are doing a dual card entry system, we are going to be provided with a few options. These options are going to be to understand if we're using accounts on the fuel site controller and if we're going to be restricting cards based on the account that they're in, or if we're going to allow cross-fueling amongst different accounts. So for example, if we select driver and vehicle tracking non-restricted, this means we are not using accounts on the fuel site controller. So when we add the cards to the system, we add them in a particular account, but the account data is going to be ignored on the controller level. That means we're basically going to allow all the vehicles to cross fuel and they're not being restricted in any way. As long as they're valid cards, they're going to be able to authorize fuel. Since we're not sending the accounts over, we need to define in the application what the transaction is going to get linked to, what account that transaction is going to get linked to. So we can do that here by selecting if we're going to use a driver-specific account or a vehicle-specific account. So when the transactions get imported into the application, if they're associated to a vehicle-specific account, then those accounts for all the transactions will be linked to that vehicle. If we do the driver and vehicle tracking restricted, this means that the fuel site controller is going to accept that account data and it is going to restrict drivers and vehicles, and they need to be in the same account. But it does allow you to use a global account, which is no account associated option, which will allow you to have a global driver or global vehicle that can cross fuel. So they will be restricted in the sense that the driver and vehicle have to be in the same account, but you do have that ability to have a global card, which will define that restriction. If we're doing driver and vehicle tracking most restricted, that means that no cross fueling is allowed. They have to be drivers and vehicles in the same account or they will not be authorized to fuel. We do have the ability to use a single card in a dual card entry. So if you want to use all three card types, single, driver, and vehicle, you can simply check this box and it will allow you to create single cards as well. One thing we didn't note up top, if you're using a single card entry system, you can define the cards as all driver cards or all vehicle cards, or you can do a combination of two. But when you create a new card, it's still going to be considered a single card. Down here at the bottom, we have the ability to use any of these checkboxes to say these are the features we want to turn on our card file. So the accounts, expiration, allocation, any sort of product restriction, quantity restriction, these can all be configured on a card level. If we turn any of these features off, then when we create a new card, those features will not be a selectable option in the card creation process. So these are going to basically allow you to define which features you want to use, and then the features that you don't want to use, we can simply leave them unchecked, and then they're not going to show up, and you're going to have a faster card creation process because we're basically optimizing. You're only going to see the things that you need. You're not going to see anything additional. You're not going to have to worry about anything additional. So we'll want to make sure that we go in here and configure this to match your existing fuel site controller if it's already an existing site, or to set it up in a way that's going to make sense for your particular site and how you're going to use the application. So for example, if we didn't want to have PIN numbers on any of our cards, we could just turn this feature off and hit save. And then when we create a new card, the PIN option is not going to be there any longer. And the same process for any of these others. If you wanted to disable them, then you can come in here and just uncheck your box. Let's scroll back up to the other options here. So, we also have some other organization settings. So if you want to define your transaction header on the receipt or define the receipt body, you could do so here. So if you needed anything to be changed, then this is where you would go. User strings just gives you the ability, when you create a card or an account, there's some user defined fields here. You can list these and change this font to display whatever you'd like it to show up in that in this case for that card. So if you wanted to track additional data, say like cell phone number or last four of the social or some other data that's not really required for fueling, but is something you want to keep track of at a card level, then you can simply just define these. And when you go to the cards menu, you're going to see these card user define 1 and user define 2 fields. But if you change them here, it will display as whatever you save in this user strings field. Going over pricing, if we select pricing, here's where the tanks and the pumps are required in order to change the price. So if you want to set the price at the time of fuel, then you can simply come in here, select which product you would like the price to change, put in whatever price that you would like it to be, and then hit send price. That's going to send the price down to the fuel site controller so that from now on, at any transactions that take place after that, you'll have that particular price for that particular product. You'll want to do this for all of the product types you would like to change. Fuel zones allows you to define which sites the cards are going to go to. If you don't use zones, then you'll need to select that all cards can be available at all sites. If you want to create a zone here, you're basically going to say, I want to create a zone for this site and this site only, and you could define which sites you would like to show up in that list. When you create a card, you're going to basically pick which sites do you want these cards to go to, and that's based on this zone. All you need to do is give it a name, select which sites you would like to be in that zone name, and then hit save. At a card level, if you had a zone that was sites 1, 2, and 3 only, and that was for a particular group of sites that was located in the same region, then you could create cards that only go to all 3 of those sites, just by simply selecting that zone in the drop-down list on the card creation process. And that's pretty much all we have as far as the tabs across the top here. One thing to note, you do have the ability to see active alerts up here on the top. This little notification bell will also show you incoming alerts on your site so that you can play that proactive role in taking care of those alerts as soon as they happen. If you're in the application when one of those alerts goes out, you would also be notified via the text message or email if you have those notifications set up.
This completes the DX Fleet interface and configuration video. If you have any questions or need help, please contact our tech support via phone or email.